Hi, everybody, and welcome to the HKU Brownbag. We're very lucky to have Max join us. I'm very glad to have this opportunity to finally see Max because we've done a lot of things together, and I consider him to be a very strong, important collaborator and an important member of our team. So it's funny that only through brown bags and these talks, I get to actually see them, kind of like converse with them. As you know, our team is very much interested and working on things related to open science and replications and extensions and meta science. And Max joined us fairly recently, but has been very active on a number of things, doing replications and extensions with us and being a red team kind of like assessor for other projects to help them do better. Big collaborations, working together with one another and working with us HKU students in our lab to bring some of the work that we've been doing to publication. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing Max talk about his experiences. So we'll start with a talk, and then afterwards we'll have a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to write this in the chat, or later raise your hand and then just join us in asking Max directly. So thank you, Max, for joining us on this. On to you.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm also really happy to be here. And yeah, today's talk is called Endorsing and Engaging in Open Science as an Early Career Researcher. And that's basically what I am, an early career researcher. And just to give you a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. So first, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more and give some background information about our field, psychology, or maybe social sciences in general, and just to get a bit into this talk. And then I'm going to talk more about the Hong Kong University Replication Project, how I got involved there, and what it meant to me to have or conduct a project there, and what I've learned, and then also what we're planning to do now in the future. And then I'm going to give you some recommendations based on my own experience, maybe a bit beyond the scope of the Hong Kong University Replication Project, which is free to you to pick up on or maybe extend your knowledge a bit further. So, oh yeah, no, the nice graphics here did not work, unfortunately, but this is basically where I'm from, Germany, and where I've started studying. So I took a bachelor's in sociology in Bremen before I went over to the UK, to Scotland, to take a bachelor in psychology, and then I went over to Bergen in Norway, where I took a master's in neuroscience, and this is where I'm still at, where I continued with a PhD with PhD studies now. And what I'm basically doing is I look at big data and apply machine learning to big brain imaging data to figure out biomarkers of aging and of brain health, in short. And you see this my pathway here is not very straightforward and very clean cut. So it's not like I took one bachelor and then I knew, okay, I'm going to take my PhD after that, and then I'm going to be an assistant professor or something. It's curvy, and yeah, I think yeah, life is probably not always as you plan it, and in the end, I ended up here, and I'm very happy where I am. And yeah, and it's a good thing to consider different places, because just living at different places can give you such richdom of experiences and impressions, or maybe it's just a short exchange or something like that. So I can really warmly recommend to travel, to maybe take an exchange semester. Okay, so now a little background on psychology. So there are two major things I will base this talk on. That's the replicability and credibility crisis and open science. So the replicability or replication crisis in psychology, that's a term which came up in the recent years, maybe in the last decade a lot, but it has been more or less a clear thing since the 80s. And this is basically, we could in short say that when you do science, you want that the findings you have are being replicated independently by other researchers, and then if they find the same thing, you can say, okay, that's perhaps a real phenomenon which we found here. And exactly in psychology, this has not worked as we wished to work. And this particularly came out in large-scale replications in the 2010 years, where many of those replications failed. And this is a bit dependent on which field of psychology you look at. So for example, social psychology seems to do a bit worse than other fields. And there are various reasons for why this replication or replicability crisis happened. And many boil it down to a biased literature. So this is basically meaning that researchers pick significant findings because those are publishable, and significant findings are usually not publishable. So, and when you conduct 10 studies and only one of those studies is significant, then you only publish this one study, but the 9 non-significant findings will never be published. And this gives a incorrect impression of what actually the results are. And in addition to that, there are many different research practices which have been labeled questionable, which are in short basically that you manipulate your data or your findings or your whatever you research to get significant findings to have them published. So well, open science one could call it the antidote to exactly this those processes which lead to replicability problems, which is basically just transparent and accessible science, and some call it just normal science or better science. And it contains concrete actions to improve the scientific quality of your outputs, and it has also often been used as a term for the whole movement, which came up now as the replicability crisis became more apparent. And there are many people who engage in those practices, just as Gilad, who made the introduction, and I. And so it has also, open science is also sometimes used synonymously as for the open science movement or the methods reform movement and so on. Okay, and so now as we know what open science is, so then I can talk a bit about how I got interested in this. And I think the story for me is not really something special or something, it's something only I experienced, because I've heard the same thing over and over again from other young or early career researchers. And this is often now in the lectures a new but also hot topic. And so we talked a little bit about the replicability crisis. And in the beginning, I didn't know what to do with this information, because you go to university, you learn in your bachelor's or master's degree a lot of facts, a lot of theories about psychology. And then somebody comes and says, yeah, well, there's a replicability crisis, and actually half of it is not really, it's quite on a shaky ground, and maybe we should reconsider. And yeah, so, and when I first heard it, it was just a particular field and a particular set of replications. But later then I noticed, wow, this is maybe more systematic, and maybe it's an actual problem we have in psychology, and maybe we should do something about it. But what can I do as an individual to improve the situation? Because I really care about psychology, and I wanted to be a researcher, and I wanted to do it right and good, and have some meaningful output in the end of my career, and not something which is just not replicable and which doesn't mean anything. So what I thought first is the smartest thing to do is to learn as much as I could about what the problem actually is, and then what other people do about it. And I think the biggest thing which came again and again is transparency, because just as I said with those questionable research practices, a lot of times the problem is that they are not being conducted in the open, but they are hidden and you don't really know what happened to this paper, or you don't know what the process was. So it's really good to be transparent about what you do and how you do it. And this is not only to avoid questionable research practices, but also maybe to get important feedback and to improve your process. And then I think it's really important to get the statistics right. Although this is maybe a scary topic, there's a lot of help out there, and a lot of people are very open to help, and you can find a lot of information, and so this is this is a key point. And the next thing I came across a lot was replications, and there are different kinds of replications, but no matter what, it seemed apparent to me that this is a very good choice to test replicability, and also to bring the field forward in the long run. And then the other thing that I said already with the stats, helping each other is a key point. So collaborations make a lot possible, and bigger organizations or bigger groups and initiatives, just as the Hong Kong Replication Project, just show that when you collaborate, you can reach so much more than if you would work alone. And here on the side, I don't know if you see my cursor. On the side, you just see some different open science practices which I put together for you. So yeah, and yeah, so just one thing maybe before I continue. Open science has often, if you would Google it, it's often being reduced to open data and open code, but it's a bit more. So it's also open methodology, and some wish for open peer review and open other resources. And so yeah, just as a side note. Okay, now on the I see that you're laughing, on the Hong Kong University Replication Project. So this is a project started by Man, and it focused on judgment and decision-making replications. And the key idea here was to engage undergraduate students to conduct replications during their dissertations. And the reason is that there are hundreds of undergraduate students going through the dissertation writing process every year, and then those dissertations usually disappear. That's the end of the process. They graduate, and that's it. And one thing is, which I find is an amazing initiative, is to bring those dissertations to publication, so that those findings have some use and are out in the open. And Gilad also combined this with replications, which is something the field really needs, but a lot are hesitant to actually conduct them, because there's this, I don't know if it's a bias, or if it's a sort of predicament, or it's well, it's being said that replications are not as easy to publish as regular studies, so less people are motivated perhaps to do replications. So in this case, those undergraduate students who write their dissertations, they are more or less forced to do replications, and then but that doesn't mean that they have no freedom in choosing them. There are a lot of different choices. There are incredible studies which have been conducted in the recent maybe 30-40 years of psychology, and it's remarkable that they haven't been replicated. So it's very exciting to do those replications. And then the next stage, early career researchers like me, some from all over the world, they don't have to study it or be engaged somehow directly with the Hong Kong University. They can pick up where the undergraduate students left off, and then bring those under those dissertations to publication, while still acknowledging, of course, the dissertation students. Okay, and now it's might not seem as straightforward as I sit in Bergen in Norway now, and so how did I get involved in this in Hong Kong? So the first thing I've heard about this project was at a reproducibility journal club. This is a journal club I can absolutely recommend. It's a distributed network of those journal clubs, which got started in, I think, Oxford. And the idea is to sit together, have a cup of tea or maybe coffee or whatever you like, and talk about urging topics in psychology, such as reproducibility, but also any other methodological or anyhow interesting topic to your group. And I think, I don't remember which reproducibility meeting it was, but Gilad just talked about exactly the Hong Kong University Mass Replication Project. And I wrote him an email and said, this is very exciting, and can I get some more information? And he was very open about it, and it was really low threshold, easy communication. And I read the documentation and thought, wow, this is so nice. I can get access to all those resources. I can use the data. I can, it's no problem at all. I could start today. So, and I nearly wanted to start the same day, but then it took another week, and then I was on board and I was part of the team. And the study I found most exciting and I wanted to work on was a replication of Kruger's above and below average effect. And this is a study which is fairly popular, especially also considering the Dunning-Kruger effect, which has many more citations than this paper, and is probably one of the best known effects. But this paper here had more than 1,000 citations and was done with 37 undergraduate students. And there were so many studies based on this effect, but there was no direct replications. There were some indirect replications, but no direct replications doing exactly what Kruger did in 1999. And so this is why Isabel was a dissertation student. I chose that publication as a replication object. And what the effect, the above and below average effect, basically mean is that if you present people with an easy task, like using a computer mouse, then and you ask them how do you do on that task compared to your peers, then people would usually say they are a bit above average on that task than their peers. And if the task is difficult, like programming on a computer, then they would say they're worse than their peers on that task. And which is a very interesting finding, I think. So, and Isabel thought of extending that even further in a manipulation and making those tasks easier and more difficult, both of those easy and difficult tasks. So, in other words, you could do those original tasks either easier. So instead of using a computer mouse, you would say using a computer mouse with your dominant hand, and the difficult version would be with your non-dominant hand. And so this would be the easy, and the difficult task would be an easy version and the difficult version of that. So computer programming guided by someone very knowledgeable or guided by someone not knowledgeable. Okay, and the good news after reviewing that, or after replicating that study, was that the replication was successful in its core, and there seems to be an above and below average effect. The only open questions here is what is the influence of differential information? So, for example, what exact tasks and how are they phrased, and how are they being processed by the participants? How does that influence the actual effects? This is something which could be built upon. And when we look at those extensions, then we saw that the easy extension was perceived easier than the original, and the difficult one more difficult than the original. So that just means that the extension worked. They were actually easier or more difficult, depending on which way we manipulated that. But what is now interesting as well is that when we make items more easy, then that's more provoking the better than average effect. And if we make them more difficult, it's more provoking of the below average effect. Okay, I hope that was clear. It was a quite fast walkthrough, but yeah, I can return to that if there are any questions on that. Okay, and now I just want to talk a little bit about the peer review, because as an early career researcher, that's completely new sort of dynamic and a different something new to experience. And maybe there are many of you who have never been in a peer review situation, and maybe it's just interesting to see how that works, and especially in terms of how this replication was perceived. And I can, of course, only speak about the journal Judgment and Decision Making, which was where we submitted the manuscript. But I must say, all the way through this process, it was just helpful and really, in the end, just making the manuscript much better. And I think we had very good communication. So it worked like this: that Gilad communicated between me and the journal. So, and then it works like that. You get it worked over email, and you get feedback on the manuscript, and then you work through the feedback point by point. And the main points which were addressed were the analysis. So we added some more analysis, some linear mixed models, and there were also some smaller errors which were spotted. There were we extended some of the discussion points. We cut down some parts of the manuscript to make it more readable. And I think all those things just show that in the end the manuscript was simply improved by that process. So it's somewhat scary to put your work out there and have somebody else review it, but in the end, everybody, I think, wants the same, which is to improve your work, and if they think it's worth publishing it, of course. And yeah, in the end, I'm just happy to have gone through this process and being somehow able to contribute to the field of that publication. Okay, now just a bit more of a practical, perhaps a practical perspective is because now I've supplied you with a lot of information about the publication process and the publication itself, but if you're perhaps interested now in this this Hong Kong Uni Replication Project, then it's maybe good to know where to start. So I think the best thing to do is right away. I think there's a lot of documentation already available on the website. You don't even have to contact everybody. You could just go there and read a little bit what's out there. And if you want to get started, then it's good to have an idea of what the expectations are, particularly. And if you're happy with them, and I think they're not outrageous or anything, but then you should go on to get involved. And the best thing is to read or to look at the different replications which have been done. Pick one which you like, and then read the replication and the original study. And what helped me, or what always helps me, is to make some sort of plan. I don't know, it doesn't have to be formal, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to agree with somebody on it, but it's good to have some imagination of how to work step by step through this process, because going through somebody else's work will demand some time, and it's not a thing you can do in one afternoon. And in the end, it might disappoint you if you don't get as far as you wished for the same day. So maybe it's good to make a bit of a plan, like, okay, one day I will have a look at half of the introduction, the next day the other half, and so on and so forth. And a really, really important sorry, a really important thing to consider here in this process is as well that you are not on your own. This is a collaborative effort, and feedback is the absolute key part of this. It's very, very difficult to work on your own and have all the information and all ideas generated only by yourself and by living in a vacuum. So it's really good to, and it's a natural part of the process in the Hong Kong University Replication Project, that you put out a draft and you spiral it, or you ping pong it with Gilad or your other collaborators. And this is also true in other collaborations in science. It's, I think, quite normal thing to do, to have put out a draft, get comments, and then ping pong it back and forth. And in the end, you will have a manuscript or a final version, which you then submit to peer review, and then you will get even further comments and improve it from there. Okay, and what I did specifically is, so I went through all the different files to double check the statistics. There are analysis files, so dependent on what sort of programs the undergraduate used. So for example, SPSS or JESP or Jamovi or R or whatever sort of code is out there. And you go through it, you check if it's all correct. Maybe you have some ideas for improvements. And then you can also check if it's corresponding in the Word files or whatever text files you use. And I basically rewrote a lot and added some discussion and conclusion points. A lot of time for me went into the figures, because I like to make nice figures. And it's what was really important as well, is to make sure that nothing gets lost, that everything is well documented, and that it's still that your code is, and whatever you have done is reproducible. And how it works is that we upload it to Dropbox, and then we put it on the Open Science Framework, which is a depository, but you can certainly use other depositories as well. And then throughout the process, I also asked others for help quite a lot for different things. And in the mass replication project, we have a Slack channel, so this is enabling the communication there, and there we call for each other or call for help for different problems. And one of the things I did there was so-called red teaming. So this is basically searching for errors in code and manuscript. And it sounds not so nice, but it's actually a really important part, because everybody makes mistakes. It's very easy to switch some numbers or have any sort of errors. Sometimes the code works the first time, and then if somebody else runs it, it doesn't anymore. And there was this paper by Hiro Imada, and also Gilad was involved in that, which has been where the editor said, okay, you can resubmit, but first we want this sort of red teaming approach and somebody else to double check your code and so on. So I said, okay, I can do that. It's because I like those sort of error finding things and go through manuscripts. And now in the end, which I'm very pleased about, is that this paper got accepted after those revisions. And in exchange, also our manuscript got error checked by Hero and some others. And independent of that, I also received some help in statistics. So it's a bit like in the project, you do something for others and others will do something for you. It's a bit, yeah, the natural way. Okay, I've learned so much from this exercise, I would say. So the main point was that you must imagine I was a master's student when I got involved, and I did not have so much experience with such form of learning or such form of working. So for me, it was just interesting to see how the project team works, and I just figured out, okay, any project can basically take it with the right team. I have also different experiences. That it depends a lot on the team which is there, and I must say the team dynamics there are really good, and you have really short waiting times, and you can be direct with everybody, and you get help. And the other point is that there are a lot of positive open science routines which we can learn from each other, and once you have them implemented, once they become a routine, it's really, really easy to maintain them. And this will only help yourself. So this is not something you have to add to your to-do list. It's more like it's going to make your to-do list smaller in the end, because you have all your files, for example, available somewhere, and you know where it is. And usually it's so easy that things get lost. But if you have them at a certain place in the cloud, then it's much easier to keep track of that. And just as I said before, it's as a team, you're much more efficient than alone. And also some small problems you have to solve, it's this problem solving becomes much, much faster. And what was very important for me as well is that I felt like my opinion mattered, and that I could, which I felt just empowered to collaborate. And this was very nice, that you're not just a student and you're not just unfinished with your degree or something like that. No, you can help other researchers, you can become part of their team, and you can produce real research in the end. Okay, and maybe just a few more words on publishing replications and publishing open science work, because I just said earlier that there might be some biases against replications or open work in terms of publishing it. So what I've learned from publishing this paper, and this might be an individual observation, but for maybe I was lucky because everything went quite smoothly. So and whenever I mentioned that I would be part of such project, I got positive feedback. And in the end, I saw, wow, there are many more open science supporters than you might think. Maybe they're not calling themselves that, but yeah, there are. And also the journal was very happy actually about the openness of the project, and that it was a replication project. And now open science work is for me more of a standard, not something which I could consider or to do or not to do. It's more like for me now good scientific practice. So I will always try to be as open in my research practices as possible. And now there's only maybe the situation that I use data sets which I cannot just put out there, but and of course there can always be limitations if you have sensitive data, but you can still put out code and your materials and so on and so forth. And now it's also the trend that I think that many journals require at least some level of transparency, which will mean that at least your code or your methods or some sort of supplementary information will need to be published. Yeah, but maybe Gilad has some more ideas on this slide here than I have. Okay, so just to give some more ideas about future directions for me in this project. So we are working a lot with Amazon Mechanical Turk samples, which is basically just a platform to get participants online, and there are several of those platforms. And in the literature, or in maybe more on Twitter and in the informal communication, it's often being said that there are qualitative differences between those samples, and the evidence we have at hand is not suggesting that. So we are going to put a paper together where we show that it's probably not true that MTurk workers' data is worse than others. Another project we're working on is reviewing the psychological literature for replications, because it's often being said that, yeah, now everything is good again. We have the replication crisis, and now we do replications, and everybody knows, and we are on a good path, but there's a relatively little quantification of how many replications are actually being done, and what the outcomes were, and so on. So that's a bit, I would say, a bit chaotic in the literature, what is actually what, and so that needs some systematizing, and we would like to do that. Okay, and just to round up a little bit, I put a list together of some recommendations. This is absolutely your choice to follow up on any of those, and to judge if any of those are any good for you. But just to show a bit of my personal journey to understand more about maybe science in general, but also open science. So I really like to listen to podcasts, and there are great psychology podcasts and methods podcasts like Everything Hurts, The Black Goat, and so on. So this is a really good way of learning about current problems in psychology. But there are also, if you like more to attend events like this one, there are a lot of resources out there. There's a lot on YouTube, but there are also always happening events. For example, you can find them on Twitter on the Open Science calendar, and they're like organized events from, for example, Data Colada and others. And what I can also just warmly recommend, if you like open science or not, that's not so important, but it's definitely always good to get organized and to talk to others and discuss research, discuss what you're doing. And what an initiative which now focuses a lot on open science is the Student Initiative for Open Science, which I've been involved in as well. So this is, I can only recommend that. Then there are other collaborations which are a little bit like the collaboration I just talked about, like the Hong Kong University Replication Project, like the Psychological Science Accelerator, which is a distributed network of psychological researchers all over the world. I think now they're covering all continents, and they do also some sort of replication, not direct, but indirect replications of larger, of well-known effects in psychology, and they try to tackle the problem that we usually only have biased samples, which is we usually base our assumptions on American or European, usually white, rich and educated participants. And the Psychological Science Accelerator tries to give more differentiated ideas and differentiated samples to those studies. And then, of course, there are many, many more things that you could, for example, have a look at replication markets. This is where you assess the replicability of different studies. So this is if you like that. I found that a lot of fun. For example, Replicates is an address which is running a project right now. And in the end, I've mentioned reproducibility already, and I said it's good to get together, and I would recommend that anyways, no matter what you want to do, if you want to do a master's or a bachelor's or whatever, it's always good to discuss what you're learning and get some new perspectives from other people. So yes, with that, please contact me if anything is unclear, or if you have any questions. If you want to know more, if you don't feel comfortable doing that now, you can, of course, doing it later. Those are my contact details. I'm on basically all sorts of platforms, so you can find me there. Okay. Then I think we should come to the questions.
Yes, thank you very much for this. That was wonderful. I'm sure like a lot of people listening to this might have all kinds of questions about technical things, both open science and the project. I'll open this like broadly, and then maybe I'll ask you some of my own questions. Does anybody have any questions that you would like to raise with Max about any of these topics or beyond? Then feel free to write this in the chat or raise your hand and just like join us. I'll get you started with one as people contemplate what they want to ask. So during my PhD and even my postdoc, it was very intimidating for me to work with others, the publishing, and I didn't really consider myself to be very capable of doing anything. But you joined us when you were still a master's student. Now you're like advanced into a PhD student. So first year PhD student, working with Isabel, who was an undergraduate, and then Hero, working with him, I think beginning of the PhD journey. So very early career researchers, if not, student status. And I think just like you mentioned, a lot of people tend to view both themselves being students and others when it comes to students as not being capable of contributing to the academic community. And obviously you've done something here that I personally find very meaningful. I'm curious about your general take about what is the role of students and early career researchers in this science reform movement or science more broadly. What are the potential contributions, the challenges, or the benefits? Like your whole perspective, if you can, about the involvement of early career researchers and students in science.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, to be honest, they are the core of this whole movement, and because they are the future of the entire field. So everything let's say the older generation has learned and has established now is just right at our feet, and we can pick up from there, and we can maybe things which has, for example, I said in the 1980s, it has already been more or less clear that if we do our practices as we did them until now, then there will be a replication crisis. Yet it has taken another 40 years to really, do something about it. So I think we can shrink that time by learning about all this in a year and maybe 2 years, and pick up from there and implement a lot of good practices as a standard. So what that means in practically is I think students, dependent on their own feeling how much they can contribute, they can start contributing to science in their bachelor's. If they are the lead authors or not I think it depends on the support system around them, and it's absolutely clear that as a very young or very early career researcher, you cannot know everything, but you can ask and you can get the right help. And so I think that the role is incredibly important of those young researchers.
how do you think someone can make the transition between the mindset of I'm a student, I don't know anything, I have so much to learn, I can't contribute, to I can lead this project to a publication, I can contribute? What makes this kind of shift in the mindset? How to make that happen?
It's very difficult to answer because I think it's a bit dependent on the individual again. But I think it's always, maybe I can talk about me personally. I feel more secure when I know more, although sometimes knowing more might make you feel also more insecure because you see there's even more to learn. But yes, I think a good thing is to start looking at what's there, at the resources, and you will quite quickly come to the end of a certain problem. Like there's only a limit to what has been done, what has been researched, no matter what way you go. And from there, I mean, there are a lot of practical skills which are very handy. So it's very handy to know some more statistics. It's very handy to know the field. It's yeah. So for example, coding is a thing, although it might be very scary. In the beginning, it helped me a lot to understand statistics more and to reproduce others' workflows more better and make my workflows more reproducible and save a lot of time in the end as well. So I think it's a bit difficult because all things are more or less interconnected, and I think you have to see yourself at which point you feel comfortable. You can of course also just ask somebody, am I ready for taking on this publication, or can I maybe you can also just get involved first, not as the lead author, but be with somebody on the project. This is what I did as well. So you can volunteer a little bit with other professors, see how they're working, and then in the end, when you feel like, okay, now I have understood enough to maybe take on my own project, then go for it.
That's terrific. Thank you. Hero, it's good to see you here. Do you want to ask Max? Maybe introduce yourself a little bit just so people know who you are, and then ask.
Yeah. So hi, Max. Hi, Gilad. Hi, everybody. So I'm Hero, and I've been working with Gilad with Heyman now really replication projects. And in the course, I got massive help from Max, and then I also did some bit of help for Max. So it was, overall a great experience for me to work with Gilad, work with everybody in the team. So this is why I'm here. And then so Max, so thank you for your talk. It was very, very interesting. So I do have one question. So when it comes to open science, I think it is not too difficult for social psychologists to practice it, because if we share the survey itself and data, it's already quite reproducible, right? But you're coming from neuroscience field, and I guess it might be a bit more tricky for you to do it. For example, you may be using kind of giant, scary, kind of expensive machine to do your study, or it may be a bit of sensitive issue to openly share physical measures or brain scanning data kind of thing. So do you kind of find any kind of barriers for open science, particularly related to your field, like neuroscience?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things you can do even if you have sensitive data. So even if you have, for example, I work with brain imaging data, and let's say you have an anatomical scan, and it's, for example, possible to identify the person based on their facial features. But you can also deface them, which is basically just taking away the entire face, and based only on the brain image, it's difficult to identify them. So that's a solution which a lot of people have done, and then you can share your data freely. There are those big repositories like the UK Biobank or Enigma, and a lot of consortia have their data out there. That works a bit differently than, for example, on the Open Science Framework, which we use, where you can just click yourself in and you get direct access to the data, but there you have to send a formal request before you get the data. So that's something you can do. About the code and the methods, that you can share, of course, all freely. So About other sorts of data, I think you can do a lot and share a lot, but I think a lot is limited because of the size of the data. So if we have 100 gigabytes of data, it's a bit, yeah, it's a bit of a chunk, and there are now more and more repositories where you can upload it. So we're getting there as well. So I think neuroscience has a tradition of sharing data. So that's has been happening for many, many years now. And the more the technology advances, the more we get there as well. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much. Hi, Ada. It's good to see you here as well. Maybe also introduce yourself briefly and then ask your question.
Yeah, sure. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Hong Kong University, and Gilad has also transformed my life with open science. But your talk has been really inspiring. I admire the curiosity and the way you went about it. And so I also participated, well, I haven't completed it, but I've participated in collaborating with Gilad's team, and it completely changed the way I view things. And I don't think it should be a choice whether or not to do open science. I think it should be a standard. But not my question, but maybe I am asking you, but it's more like a psychological question. So I have big issue with code. Like I see it and I get like heart palpitations. So you are coming from, I don't know what you said, machine learning, and it's for you, it's like, it's not a problem, but for me, I can't breathe, and I'm almost ashamed to say it, I should know better now. But actually, before I started the postdoc, I've never used code. I mean, I've only ever learned SPSS, and I've studied in Israel and I've studied in New Zealand. So the first R thing was, anyway, what I'm saying is, how do you overcome this? Like, how do you come this over fear? I feel like if I don't know code, then I could never do proper open science. Like, I have this disability that I carry around with me. So I'm asking you, like, how do you do it? How do you go about like tackling these issues?
Yeah, I mean, I do not have so much experience with machine learning and with coding, so that was just I started my PhD now in January, so that's quite fresh. And I think what contributed to get me this position is that I participated in this project here with Gilad, and also to have just to learn more coding. So I took this as a practical example because I attempted before to learn more R coding, and you can use all those sorts of websites where you go along practically coding, and then you, for example, data camp, where you solve different tasks. And I did not find that to be the right thing for me, so I needed something practical, some project which I could really do completely, coding all the way through. Because then maybe it's because I had to force myself to actually do it, to not choose anything else. And then so I think that's actually the best thing you can do, to have a real world implication which you have to do all the way. But there are many ways of getting started. I mean, you can use programs like Jamovi, where you have this like transitional tools where you can see the R code, you can read along while you do it. But I would also recommend R because you have great helper functions and you can read up all the information which is out there just by typing a question mark in front of whatever function you're using. But the main thing is you have to be patient. You have to take it slow, read the documentation, and I am this impatient person as well. Sometimes when it's frustrating and anxiety provoking, and we want to hop 3 steps over, but often you just have to do it step by step, slowly. and then it will pay off. It's the beginning is probably the worst and the scariest, but once you have started, a few days in, suddenly things start making sense. But in general, it's probably also good to understand coding in general. So there are some general principles which are very, it's like some coding 101 kind of thing can also help, because it's a bit like learning a language. You have to understand some of the logic of it, and then it can help.
Okay.
You've also had the kind of unique experience of going over Hero's code and going over Isabel's code and verifying that. Did that help?
Oh yes, it's very, very hard in the beginning, and it gets exponentially easier. So now I prefer learning, like for example, some stuff I learn about machine learning, I learn now by reading other people's code only. So I could go in and look at the mathematical notations. This is probably important, but half of the thing is how to do it practically, and then I just go into what other people have done. So yeah, that's huge help. And then you also see there are so many different ways of solving a problem. So this is also nice, because then you can figure out your own way of doing it. And so there's not this one solution, and if you don't do it right, then you fail. It's there's a lot you can do.
Well, you are an inspiration. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. I think we have one more question from Mingxia in the chat. She says, thanks, Max, great talks. I was just wondering, what's your opinion on pre-registration? Do you think that pre-registration is needed for all studies? She says it takes more time to complete a study, but of course, more reliable. And maybe you can comment a little bit about, because you didn't talk about the publication, this project that you've done being pre-registered, but what did this involve? What was the takeaway? How do you feel generally about pre-registrations as something that's as part of open science and contributing to science?
Yes, pre-registration. So I think it's really a chance to think thoroughly through your study before you conduct it, which saves you a lot of pain before even conducting it, and which will make it just simply better oftentimes. So even if you don't, go through do a null hypothesis testing registration where you lay out all your hypotheses, because maybe it might just be exploratory. It's still, I think, a great thing to do, and I must say I do it for most studies now, not necessarily for those really exploratory things I do right now with machine learning, because there's because it's going to be so much exploration, and there's not necessarily the big value, but making a plan. I'm going to make a plan before doing it. But generally, I think it's absolutely, it's great to do, and I would also tend to do registered reports more often, which is basically not only pre-registering, but getting the study reviewed before collecting data and before doing the analysis. Maybe not necessarily before collecting data, because there's some instances where you can have the data collected, but before having the results at least.
So you mentioned one type of studies, for example, exploratory or machine learning, that maybe does not need to have pre-registration or less of a role in pre-registrations. Can you say something about what the contribution seems like to you? What have you gained personally from doing pre-registrations? What kind of what's the main role beyond the confirmatory hypothesis?
You think really through the design and what steps are exactly being done and what analysis, so that you don't end up with some data and you do whatever. Maybe even do some questionable research practices, do some
I don't know, exploratory things which go a bit too far. But yeah, so but now I have, for example, an exploratory study where we don't test any hypothesis, and where we just say in the analysis section we are going to do a multiverse analysis. So we're going to do all possible analysis. So there it didn't do so much with the analysis, but it helped definitely to think through how do our instruments look and what do we measure with them, and how can we generalize from that? What is this sort of analysis, this multiverse analysis, actually telling us? So this is good to think about that.
Does a multiverse analysis need to be pre-registered, or you just run it and see? Like, I feel like that also has a lot of flexibility, no?
Yeah, I mean, now we said we're going to use this and that software package. So it depends obviously on which software package you use, which analysis are being then included. So it has flexibility. And I think if you're going to do something exploratory, you always have some sort of flexibility.
Okay, good. I think time for us to sum this up. Really good to see you both. Hopefully we have a chance to do this in person one day, and we'll be in touch and keep collaborating, hopefully. So whenever you feel like you have some time and you want to do more, I'm here. Okay, take care, everybody. Bye for now.
It's good to see you. Bye.